You won't believe the nerve some people have, and when I say nerve, I mean the kind that makes you stop and wonder if someone actually thinks the world owes them everything just because they exist. That day had started out beautifully for me. The sun was out, the lake breeze was gentle, and I had just returned from a long ride on my Harley Davidson, the kind of ride that clears your head and reminds you why you worked so hard in life. The chrome shined so bright you could see your reflection in it, and the rumble of the engine had left the ground humming under my boots. That bike wasn't just a machine to me, it was the symbol of years of dedication, sweat, and sacrifice. I had bought it outright after saving for years, and every time I took it out, I felt like the king of the road. I parked it right outside my cabin, carefully covered it, and stood there for a moment admiring how perfect it looked under the sun. I was about to head inside, kick back with a glass of iced tea, and enjoy the peace of my property when suddenly a voice cut through the air, sharp and arrogant. "Nice bike. My mom says I should take it for a spin." I turned slowly, expecting maybe a neighbor joking around, but instead I saw him, Karen's son. If you've ever dealt with one of those spoiled kids who grow up thinking the world revolves around them because their mom bullies everyone else, you'll know exactly the type of person I'm talking about. He was standing there leaning against my fence like he owned it, wearing sunglasses that probably cost more than they should, chewing gum like he was starring in some teen drama show. He wasn't a kid in the innocent sense, he was in his early 20s, tall, cocky, and walking around with that kind of smug confidence that comes from never being told no in his entire life. At first, I thought he was joking. I even let out a small laugh, thinking maybe he was just trying to impress someone or show off. But the smirk on his face didn't fade, and instead of backing down, he strolled right up to my Harley like it already belonged to him. He reached out and tapped the leather seat with his finger, leaving a faint mark that immediately made my blood pressure rise. "Go ahead, toss me the keys," he said with a smirk that made me want to roll my eyes. "I'll bring it back later. Don't make me call my mom." Now, I don't know about you, but when a grown man threatens to call his mom because he doesn't get what he wants, it's both hilarious and concerning. But around here, his mom wasn't just any mom. She was Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, the woman who believed her word was law and everyone else's property was just an extension of her empire. This was the same Karen who had fined neighbors for leaving their trash bins out too long, yelled at families for painting their fences the wrong shade of brown, and once tried to dictate what type of flowers people could plant in their front yards. Her son was her shadow, her spoiled little prince, and clearly, he had inherited her talent for entitlement. I took a deep breath and tried to keep it civil, because the last thing I wanted was to escalate things unnecessarily. "This isn't a toy, kid," I said firmly but calmly. "It's a dangerous machine, and more importantly, it's mine. You're not riding it." But Karen's son wasn't the type to hear no. He puffed up his chest, stepped closer, and raised his voice just enough that I noticed curtains moving in a few nearby houses. Neighbors were watching. "You think you're special just because you got this bike? My mom runs this HOA. That means I can ride whatever I want around here. If you don't like it, you can move out." I couldn't believe the words coming out of his mouth. The sheer arrogance, the ridiculous sense of ownership over something that clearly wasn't his, it was like talking to someone from another planet. I gave him one more chance to back down, shaking my head and saying, "Listen, I don't care what your mom runs. This Harley belongs to me. You're not getting it, and that's the end of the story." His face twisted in frustration, and he muttered something under his breath before storming off. But not before throwing one last line over his shoulder, "You'll regret this." I stood there, half annoyed and half amused, thinking maybe he'd just go complain to his mom and that would be the end of it. But deep down, I knew better. I knew this wasn't the kind of family that let things go. This was the kind of family that turned every little inconvenience into a battle, and every no into a personal attack. Sure enough, a couple of hours later, the sound of sirens and flashing blue lights outside my cabin proved me right. 2 officers walked up my driveway, calm but serious, and right behind them came Karen and her son. She was already waving her arms dramatically, pointing at me, pointing at my Harley, shouting something I couldn't even make out from the distance. Neighbors gathered at their porches and windows, eager to see the show. As the officers approached, one of them said, "Sir, we received a report that this motorcycle may be stolen." I blinked in disbelief, trying not to laugh. Stolen? From who? Karen's son stepped forward, chin raised high like he had just won a medal. From me. That's my bike, and he took it. My mom told me to call you. And there it was, the moment I realized I wasn't dealing with just arrogance anymore. I was dealing with outright lies, manipulation, and an HOA power play. I stood there trying not to laugh at how ridiculous this whole scene had become, but the look on Karen's face told me she wasn't joking. She was standing in the middle of my driveway like it was her personal courtroom, her son standing behind her with that smug little smirk plastered on his face. The officers glanced between us, clearly confused, because it wasn't every day they got called to settle a dispute over a shiny Harley Davidson in front of a lake cabin. I calmly explained to them that the motorcycle was mine, that I had just returned from a ride, and that it had never left my possession. But before I could even finish my sentence, Karen cut me off, pointing her perfectly manicured finger at me and shouting, "He's lying. That motorcycle belongs to my son. He's been talking about getting one for months, and now suddenly this man has one. I don't think so. He probably forged the papers. Arrest him. Now I don't know about you, but being accused of forgery and theft in your own driveway by the neighborhood HOA president is enough to make your blood boil." I took a slow breath, reminded myself that losing my temper would only give them more ammunition, and calmly handed the officers my registration, insurance, and title. Everything matched. My name, my address, even the VIN number on the bike. The officers looked it over and nodded, clearly satisfied, but Karen wasn't about to let it go. She clutched the stack of HOA bylaws in her hand like it was the Constitution and barked, "Those documents don't mean anything here. HOA rules override everything in this neighborhood, and our rules say all vehicles must be approved. That bike was not approved. That makes it unauthorized property, and unauthorized property can be seized. My son has already claimed it, so hand it over." For a moment I honestly thought she'd lost her mind. HOA rules override everything? Seizing my Harley as unauthorized property? Was she serious, or had she just been drinking too much of her own power? The officers exchanged a glance, clearly realizing they had walked into a hornet's nest, but instead of shutting it down, they said they'd need to file a report just to cover their bases. That little sliver of uncertainty was all Karen needed. She puffed up her chest and smirked like she had just won the case. Her son crossed his arms, tilting his sunglasses down just enough to give me a smug look, as if he was already imagining himself cruising down the road on my bike. That was the moment I knew reasoning with them wasn't going to work. I could stand here all day, wave documents in the air, and explain the law until I turned blue, but they weren't after the truth, they were after control. And if there's one thing Karen loved more than control, it was humiliating people who dared to stand up to her. But what Karen and her spoiled little prince didn't know was that I had a card up my sleeve that she could never play. While she had HOA bylaws and a loud voice, I had something far stronger, connections that went way beyond her neighborhood fiefdom. So I pulled out my phone and dialed a number I rarely had to use. The state attorney of our district just happened to be a close personal friend of mine, someone I had worked with years ago on community projects and stayed in touch with ever since. I hit speaker, and when his deep, commanding voice answered, the entire scene froze. "This better be important," he said, his tone half amused and half curious. I explained the situation in about 3 sentences flat, telling him the HOA president and her son were accusing me of stealing my own motorcycle and that 2 officers were standing here trying to figure out what to do. The state attorney's response was immediate, sharp, and left no room for misunderstanding. "Officer, listen carefully. That man is a personal friend of mine, and I can vouch right now that Harley Davidson is his legal property. I suggest you check his paperwork, because I promise you it's legitimate. And while you're at it, remind these people that filing a false police report is a serious offense. If they continue, I'll have them in court faster than they can spell HOA. The air shifted instantly. The officers straightened up, their casual uncertainty gone, and nodded respectfully into the phone. Karen's face went from flushed red with confidence to pale white with panic. Her son's smirk slipped right off his face, and for the first time all afternoon, he looked unsure of himself. One of the officers cleared his throat and said, "Ma'am, sir, everything checks out here. The motorcycle belongs to him. Filing a false claim could land you in real trouble." But Karen wasn't ready to let go of her fantasy just yet. She shouted, "You can't threaten me. I'm the HOA president. You have to listen to me. HOA law is binding." She waved those papers in the air like they were holy scripture, her voice shrill enough that more neighbors started coming out to watch. But the second officer shook his head and replied firmly, "Ma'am, HOA bylaws don't override state law. This man has legal proof of ownership. If you or your son make another false claim, we'll have no choice but to press charges." Her son, clearly realizing he had gone way too far, tried to backpedal. "I was just trying to borrow it," he stammered, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean for it to go this far." But it was too late. The lie had already been exposed, and the entire neighborhood was watching the mighty Karen and her spoiled son squirm under the weight of real law. The state attorney, still on speakerphone, delivered the final blow. "Consider this your one warning. If I hear even one more complaint of harassment or a single attempt to seize what doesn't belong to you, I will personally see that both of you face legal consequences. Do I make myself clear?" His voice was so sharp it sliced through the silence like a blade. Karen opened her mouth as if to argue, but no words came out. She just stood there, shaking slightly, clutching those useless HOA papers like they might save her. Her son shuffled backward, suddenly very interested in staring at the ground. The officers gave me an apologetic nod and told me to have a good night before escorting Karen and her son off my property. As they left, I couldn't help but notice the looks on my neighbors' faces. Some were wide-eyed in shock, others were barely hiding their grins, and a few even gave me discreet thumbs-ups. Word was going to spread fast, and for once, it wasn't Karen controlling the narrative. It was me, the guy who had just stood up to her and won with the help of the state attorney. The best part? My Harley still sat exactly where I parked it, shining under the porch light, untouched and safe. And in that moment, as the dust settled and the night grew quiet again, I realized that this was more than just about a bike. It was about proving that no matter how loud or entitled someone acts, they can't rewrite reality just to suit themselves. The next few days after that fiasco were tense, the kind of tension you can feel in the air even when no one says anything out loud. I could feel eyes on me every time I pulled my Harley out of the driveway, neighbors peeking through blinds or pretending to water their lawns just so they could watch what I was doing. Everyone had heard about the stunt Karen and her son had pulled, and while most people thought it was outrageous, some were waiting to see if she would actually follow through with her threats. Because if there's one thing Karen was known for, it was never backing down without trying one more time. I knew deep in my gut this wasn't over, and I was right. 3 mornings later, I walked outside to find a bright orange sticker slapped across the windshield of my Harley, taped so aggressively that it took me a full 5 minutes to peel it off without damaging the paint. The sticker read, "Unauthorized vehicle. Subject to towing. Contact HOA for release." My blood boiled. I knew exactly who had done this, and it wasn't just a random act of vandalism, it was Karen's attempt to scare me into compliance. She wanted to make it look official, like she had the authority to dictate what stayed and what went on my property. The problem for her was, I wasn't the kind of guy who got scared by paper threats. I pulled out my phone, snapped a picture of the sticker, then of the Harley with my house in the background. Documentation. Evidence. If she wanted a battle, she was going to get one, but it wasn't going to be on her terms. Later that day, I got the inevitable knock on my door. Karen stood there with her son in tow, both of them looking smug and self-satisfied. "We've given you notice," she announced as though she were reading a royal decree. "That motorcycle isn't HOA approved, and it's creating a nuisance in the neighborhood. We're scheduling it to be towed tomorrow morning unless you hand it over voluntarily." I leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed, staring at her like she had just told me the sky was green. "Karen," I said slowly, "let me make something clear. This is my property. The Harley is registered, titled, and insured in my name. You have no legal authority to tow it, and if you try, you'll be dealing with criminal charges." Her son snickered, muttering something about me bluffing, but his mother doubled down. "You think your little phone call to your attorney friend scares me? HOA rules are binding. If you don't like them, you can leave. My son deserves that bike, and one way or another, he's going to get it." That was the moment I realized Karen wasn't just entitled, she was delusional. She truly believed her HOA bylaws trumped state law, that she had the power to decide what people owned, and that the rest of us were just pawns in her little empire. I didn't slam the door in her face, even though I wanted to. Instead, I smiled and said, "All right, Karen. Go ahead. Try it. Let's see what happens when you mess with the state attorney's office." The flicker of doubt that crossed her face was brief, but I caught it. She turned on her heel, dragging her son with her, and I knew she'd be back with something even more dramatic. Sure enough, the very next morning I was woken up by the rumble of a tow truck pulling into the street in front of my cabin. I threw on my boots and stormed outside, and there it was, a massive flatbed truck, the driver looking uncertain as Karen stood there waving her arms like a traffic cop, directing him toward my driveway. Neighbors had already gathered, phones out, recording everything. Karen was putting on a show, and she wanted the whole neighborhood to see her victory. "Stop right there," I barked at the tow truck driver, holding up my hand. "If you so much as touch that bike, you'll be part of an illegal seizure, and I will personally have you charged." The driver froze, clearly uncomfortable, and looked back at Karen. "Ma'am, you said this was an HOA order. Do you actually have legal paperwork?" Karen shoved her HOA bylaws at him like they were a court order, shouting, "This is all the paperwork I need." That was my cue. I pulled out my phone and dialed the state attorney again, putting him on speaker so everyone could hear. His voice boomed out across the driveway, sharp and furious. "If that tow truck driver touches that motorcycle, he will be arrested for theft. Karen, you've been warned. HOA rules don't give you the right to seize private property. If you interfere again, I'll personally file charges against you and your son for harassment, vandalism, and attempted theft." The driver immediately put the truck in reverse, shaking his head. "I'm not touching this. I'm not losing my license over some HOA nonsense." He drove off, leaving Karen standing there red-faced and sputtering while the neighbors snickered behind their phones. Her son tried to save face by yelling, "This isn't over," but the truth was, they had just humiliated themselves in front of the entire neighborhood. But even then, I knew Karen wasn't going to stop. She thrived on control, and now she had lost it in front of an audience. That humiliation was like fuel for her fire. Later that evening, I found another notice taped to my front door, this one threatening me with daily HOA fines until I removed the unauthorized vehicle from my property. It was laughable, but I wasn't laughing. This wasn't just about a bike anymore. This was harassment, pure and simple. And the more she pushed, the more determined I became to put an end to her antics once and for all. I spent that night gathering every piece of evidence I had, photos of the stickers, recordings of her threats, the video neighbors had sent me of her trying to order the tow truck. I compiled it into a neat little file and sent it directly to the state attorney's office. I knew she thought she was invincible because she had bullied so many people into silence, but she had just picked a fight with the wrong man. And while she believed the HOA was her kingdom, she was about to learn what happens when you push someone who has the law on their side. The following morning, I sat on my porch sipping coffee while watching Karen march up and down the street, clearly fuming. She kept glancing at my Harley, probably imagining herself tearing down the road on it, but all she had now was the sound of laughter behind closed blinds and the knowledge that her power was slipping. For the first time since I had moved in, I felt like the neighborhood was starting to see her for what she really was, not a leader, not an authority figure, but just a bully who thought the rules didn't apply to her. And if she wanted a war, I was ready. Because unlike everyone else she had intimidated, I wasn't scared of her. I had something she couldn't fight, the truth, the law, and the determination to protect what was mine at any cost.